the fact that this happens to people, this fact that it happens to one person is too much. The fact that it's happening over and over and over again, it's not acceptable in any way.
My oldest son died from fentanyl, and it's destroyed my life. So Gage was my hero child. Everything he ever loved from when he was little, he wanted to be a hero. I think we started with Spider-Man. He actually swung from the curtains one time, and they obviously did not work like spider webs. And he caught the side of his nose and ripped it, wound up having to get sutures. And I think we moved on to Indiana Jones, all kinds of superheroes. Gage was also my emotional child. He was very sensitive. He had a huge heart. He was that kid that stood up for other kids that were getting bullied at school. He was also the kid who was very sensitive to insults. I think I remember in 5th grade, I got a call that he was getting kicked off the school bus, because he had gotten in a fight with a kid. The kid had told him he looked like Justin Bieber, and that was enough to apparently initiate a fight. So Gage was definitely never boring as a child. He kept me on my toes. He was, but such a loving child. Like I have 3 children, and he's my oldest. And out of the 3, he was my kisser, my hugger, the I love you, Mom. So he was definitely my more emotional and sensitive kid. He did bring home a lot of Fs. We did summer school a couple of years. School was, and it depended. Then there was, I think, middle school. He did wonderful in middle school. Straight A's, honor roll. He did robotics. He did archery. He did band. He did football. He did all kinds of different extracurricular activities. Of course, none of them he ever really stuck with for very long. He kind of would switch those out, but he was passionate about them when he would do them. Yeah. High school is where it started to get a little tricky. We started off high school on a really good foot. Like I said, he was real into being the hero. And so I think it was somewhere in middle school, beginning of high school, he decided he wanted to be a Marine. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL. And he couldn't just be in the Army or in the Navy. He had to be a SEAL or a Marine. So he joined JROTC, and he excelled at that. In fact, several of the kids that he was in ROTC with, I've still talk to every now and then. And they were like, they've been blown away, because Gage was always such a strong leader. And then he did CB cadet through the Navy base, got his Master of Arms training. Again, just all about, being that American hero. That was kind of his thing. And he had a little high school sweetheart that he was dating. And that's when I think the big change happened. The high school sweetheart moved on to another friend, and then he kind of lost his friend group. He lost the girlfriend, and we went on a downhill slide. I think that was 10th grade, the end of 10th grade.
He was full of life. He was awesome. So dedicated to ROTC. He wanted to be an elite soldier. I saw a lot of myself in Gage. Dedication, the aspirations. And I think that's why we butted heads so much, because when he started down this dark path, I myself am an addict. I was addicted to opioids for 15 years, and I was trying to guide him through much resistance, so to speak. And finally, we started to establish a relationship, and he was Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? He even told me he loved me. And we were getting there. And then he was taken.
He was forced to find a new friend group. And the friend group that he found was probably the last friend group any parent would want their kids hanging out with. Most of them didn't have good parental supervision. They were kind of just left to run the streets. I think at that time was about when like Snapchat and some of the newer social media was just starting to come on the scene. And so I was just learning how to use it. In fact, I didn't know how to use it, but I was learning quickly on a curve because of him. And I would find pictures of them out like in the middle of the night, and it would look like they were like holding up gang symbols and, things like that. And I would ask him about it, and he'd be like, "Mom, you're just being overprotective. That's just what we do. But I knew better. I was an emergency room nurse at the time, and I worked in the community. So I knew some of the local gangs that would come in the emergency room. And so I knew some of the symbols that I was seeing, show up in different things. I was like, no, these aren't just regular run-of-the-mill friends. This is a bad group of kids. With him being my oldest, obviously it was that moment in time where it's like, am I being too overprotective as a mom? Do I need to step back? Am I just being a little bit too judgmental? Do I need to give him space and let him figure it out? You're always, I feel like as a parent, especially when you're dealing with teenagers, you're at that fine line of, do I forbid them from doing this and push them in the wrong direction? Or do I, allow it to happen and let it work its way out? And I felt a lot of turmoil during that time of his life. Like I just didn't know what to do. He started to get in trouble at school. He was suspended a couple times. Mostly fighting. He was just getting in a lot of fights. He spent a lot of time in in-school suspension, got very familiar with that process, and then they sent him to an alternative school. I think that was junior year, and that's when he kind of decided, Mom, I'd rather just drop out and get my GED. I don't want to, I'm just going to keep getting in fights. It's probably best that I just drop out and get my GED. And that's what he did, and he got it on the first try. I mean, super smart kid, but it was more the pathway at that point, And that was another big thing is I was so, as a mom, trying to be protective of his dreams and like what he wanted. And I knew what he wanted was to be a Marine or to be a Navy SEAL. And I knew that came with a lot of, things that you can't do, like getting in trouble, doing drugs, all of those things. So I was doing my best to protect him from destroying his future. From there, it just got worse and worse. And to add insult to injury, this was also a point in his life where he had not had contact with his biological dad since he was 3. I think his biological dad would call once in a blue moon, and it would be just like a 20-minute conversation, and then we wouldn't hear from him again for another year. He was not involved at all in Gage or his brother's life, and about this time is when Gage started getting curious about him and wanting to know, he had asked about him, and I didn't lie. In fact, I had sugar-coated some things just to kind of save him the hurt and the pain of knowing some stuff. And about the time he turned 18, he was like, I want to go meet him. I want to be in his life. And against Mom's better judgment, that's what he decided to do. And biological dad was, I didn't know it, obviously, when I got pregnant with Gage, but very abusive, had a lot of mental health disorders that I'm not quite sure were ever diagnosed properly. And he had a really bad addiction problem to a lot of different things. And that continued well on, as far as I know, he probably still is. The one thing about Gage was anytime he felt uncomfortable, anytime he got to the point where somebody was giving him a little bit of flack or he wasn't getting what he wanted, he was ready to jump ship and move somewhere else. And, he spent some time in Ohio with his biological dad. He did a lot of bouncing around. He spent some time with my brother and my sister-in-law in Florida. That wasn't a really good situation for him either. He just could never really find, he wanted it. He wanted it so bad. And I truly believe that. Like, he really wanted to find his place, and he wanted to do good, and he wanted to, he had this overwhelming urge to want to impress people and have people be proud of him. But he just couldn't get his feet on the ground long enough to make any traction with it. He just kept burning bridges everywhere he went, and just leaving a trail of smoke behind him. He did meet a girl while he was in Ohio with his dad, and they fell in love and became like little gypsies, kind of moving all over the country. They spent some time with us. They would all the way from Mississippi to Texas to Ohio. I think they spent some time in Virginia, one of the Carolinas. I mean, they were all over the place. And it was the happiest I had seen him in a long, long time. He was very happy. And at some point I realized that they were ordering drugs off the internet. And I don't remember the first time I figured that out, but it had to have been going on for a little while. But I got a package delivered to my mailbox, and it was addressed to my son, and it was just a regular plain like shipping envelope. And I think it had a return address to somewhere in Alabama. And I opened it, and it was a ton of little blue pills. And I freaked out, and I called him and I said, what is this package? Where did this come from? What are you doing? And he told me that he had gone online and got an online doctor who had diagnosed him with anxiety, and that they were pills to help with his anxiety. Looking back, I'm pretty sure there was fentanyl in them. I did not have them tested. I flushed them down the toilet. I called the police department in Alabama and alerted them about it. And just, told him, don't do this anymore kind of thing, hoping that was going to be the end of it. But I know it wasn't. He started using other people's addresses. They figured out they could order these things for real cheap and they could sell them. So I think they were selling them too. And I don't think they knew. Again, I don't know for sure that they had fentanyl in them. But I know at some point the ones they were getting off the internet did. And it was shocking to me how, when I first opened that package, I was just blown away that you could just go online and order these pills and they just show up at your door like that. And, this is going through our U.S. Post Office. We're mailing this, it's coming from within our country. And, when I called that Alabama Police Department, I was just like, you got to check out this address. You got to figure out what's going on. And they're like, oh, well, we're aware of it. We're working on it. And it sounded like maybe there was an investigation going on, but the guy that I talked to was not very gung-ho to, meanwhile, hundreds of pills are getting shipped all over the country, and y'all know about it and you're watching it happen. The girlfriend that I told you he was moving around the country with, they took some drugs one night and they both fell asleep, and he woke up and she didn't, and she was dead next to him. And I got a call. He was in Austin, Texas at the time, and he called me, and of course got in my car and drove all the way through to Austin and got to him. And I was devastated for him. I was devastated. I know, just there's so many things that go through your head at that point. And I thought that was going to be his rock bottom. It wasn't. It just made it worse, because he went from he went from battling addiction to now he's battling addiction and grief. And so he did live for a year after that. I can't count how many rehabs we sent him to, many rehabs. None of them were good enough. I mean, most want to do 30 days, and that's just not long enough to really make any kind of headway. The last time he decided he wanted to go back to Ohio. He had gotten some charges in Ohio, and he wanted to go back to Ohio, get the charges taken care of so that he could move on with his life, and that was going to be his fresh start. And he got up there, and he got along around his biological dad, who was also in the drug scene, and just made it easy for him to get right back into it. He wound up getting arrested. He went to jail. They sent him to Teen Challenge. He did 90 days there. And then his biological dad went and picked him up from rehab, decided he had had enough and that he could do it on his own. I think 3 weeks. It might have been longer than that. After he got out of the rehab, I got a phone call, and it was from Gage's phone. So, of course, I answered it, but it was, his dad saying that he was dead and that they had found him.
We had just come home. Mandy's phone rang, and it was Gage. And she had talked to him the day before. And he asked if we could pray for him, which was out of the ordinary. He had never asked us that before. When she picked up the phone, it was her ex-husband, Gage's biological father, Steve. And as soon as I saw him, I instantly knew. Instantly what had happened. And Mandy fell apart at that moment, understandably. And so did I. But I couldn't show it. I had to stay strong and make the phone calls that nobody ever wants or should have to make.
It's kind of very blurry. Obviously, I think I was in shock. When you're a mom of a kid who's battling addiction, I feel like you go through a process at some point where you kind of prepare yourself, like one day you might get that phone call. And I thought I had prepared myself, but I hadn't. And I just you kind of have to know the backstory. Like, I did not have a good relationship with his dad at all. Like I said, he was super abusive. So it was very bad communication. I did finally get the coroner on the phone, and they couldn't give me a whole lot of answers. It didn't sound like they investigated it at all. They were basically just like, it looked like he had been dead for a long time. He was laying in bed, and we found some powdery residue next to him, and we're gonna do an autopsy, and we'll call you when we're releasing his body. So now here I am sitting in Mississippi, and he's in Ohio, and I can't even go see him. So they finally did call me, and they released his body, and I got to drive up there to go see him one last time. They did finally, give me the toxicology results, and it was positive for fentanyl. It was really weird though, because they didn't find fentanyl at the scene at all, and it just made me so upset because they didn't even investigate how did this happen? How does a kid? Well, he was my kid. He was 21 at the time, but how does a kid die from fentanyl and there's no fentanyl at the scene? He had been dead for hours, and I don't know. There's so many questions that go through your head that you're left to try to figure out, especially when the environment he was in was such a hostile environment to begin with. And I didn't have any trust, and I don't know. That's one I'll probably never get closure on.
To be a father and to guide and love and protect children is the best thing in the world. But being able to identify with a child on a level that nobody really understands, being that he became an addict and I was an addict, am an addict, whatever you want to say, that brings people closer together because of that identification. I can't explain how many times that I had deep conversations with him over what I'd been through and what he was going through at the time. And it was almost like me talking to myself in a mirror. And right before he died, we had a conversation, and it was better. He was positive. He wanted to live. I honestly, I don't think there is an addict that says, I want to be on drugs and I don't want to live. He wanted to live. Just mental health and drugs took a toll.
I have good days. I have bad days. They kind of rotate. I've got a huge support group, so I feel super supported. But you're always going to have those moments where you're alone, and you have to think about the fact that your kid's not coming home, and they're not going to have a future. And all those dreams that you thought would come true one day just don't come true. If there's one thing I could have counted on for grandchildren, it would have been Gage, because he was definitely my lady's kid.
The person that died from the fentanyl poisoning was not who he was. And that's more of the point I want to get across to everyone, is that they're not drug addicts. They're people's brothers, sons, daughters. They are people. They might have a problem, but they're still people, and we love them. As a family, it removes a part of your identity as a family. Then you have to scramble to find who we are now. And through grief and loss, it's hard to pull back together. And we're still struggling with it.
You get put in this group of being in this group of people that you really never wanted to be in, Now I'm the mom to a kid who overdosed on fentanyl. And that's a weird group to be in, because you meet other people in the same position you're in and they understand you, but at the same time, it's just weird and uncomfortable. And after losing Gage, I went through a process where I was super, super angry. I was super angry with God. I had so many questions. And at the same time, I remembered my grandmother. My grandmother had lost a child when I was 19, and I remembered seeing her get super angry. And I don't think she ever went back to church after that. And I just remembered watching her go through that process, and I knew I needed to get back into a church, do something to repair the anger that was growing in my heart. And at the time, a friend of mine had just started going to a new church, and she invited me, and I went, and it's been an amazing experience where I found a lot of healing. And I feel like even though I didn't get answers about how Gage died or what happened. I have gotten closure with what I felt like were unanswered prayers. I spent all this time praying that God would save my child and make him healthy and make him happy and, give him his life back. And so when he died, it was like, you didn't answer any of my prayers. Like, do you not care about me? And, but I look at it now like he did answer my prayers, just not in the way I thought he should. Because my son is no longer, he's no longer hurting. He's no longer in turmoil. And I know that he's in God's arms in peace. And so that's a comfort that I find comfort in some days, if I'm being honest. I definitely feel like doing something to give his life purpose. He wanted to be a hero. So if he can't do it from heaven, I'm going to do it for him. And I let him lead me. He gives me signs all the time, like from the clouds. And it was so awesome. I got rebaptized recently, and I let some of his ashes go in the river I was baptized in. And that was the first time I'd released any of his ashes. And we were baptized and got out of the river and looked up, and there was a giant cross in the sky made out of clouds. And so I feel like he talks to me through the clouds sometimes. But my main thing, purpose-wise, Gage also left behind a lot of people. Like I said, he kind of had made a trail of destruction in the process of everything that happened. And so in that process, I've a lot of people that he met along the way that came into our lives that I've met. And a lot of them were using drugs with him. And I feel like I've been able to mentor some of those people. There's a young lady in Ohio that I've actually been working with and talking to and trying to be supportive of. And she recently texted me and said she had like 130 days clean and sober. So that was inspirational. Another young lady that he had actually lived with after a rehab facility just recently had a baby, and I get to see pictures of the baby, and she's been clean now. So doing a lot of that. The other part is obviously spreading the awareness. I didn't know about fentanyl until my son started using fentanyl. I feel like it's getting to be a little bit more popular now, and people are becoming more aware, but there's still a lot of people that don't think it can happen to them. And I've met so many people along this journey. All it took was one pill at a party. So that can happen. Another big thing for me is I was a nurse, and like I said, an ER nurse, 15, 16 years. And I knew back then that the mental health system was not good in this country, just by the number of patients we would get in that we had no resources. We had nothing to do with them. And then when I went through everything I went through with Gage, I was taking him to therapies. I was taking him to emergency rooms. I was begging for help, like, please help my kid. And there was no resources. And so that's another big thing for me is pushing and advocating for better resources, more resources, obviously awareness. And then another thing that I think is good to mention is I was seeking all of these resources and all this help for Gage, but the one thing I never sought for him was to bring God into his life in church. I didn't raise him in a church, and I regret that. I think part of what Gage went through was searching for a dad that he never had. My husband now was his stepfather for a few years, but he came into his life later. And so that it was hard to make that connection because he was already a teenager by then. But I feel like if I had brought him to church and maybe he'd had a relationship with God, that would have changed some things. So that would be some advice I would give any parents now if they're, struggling with their kids in addiction is maybe see if that's something that would be helpful.
You know, I sit on the outside and watch Mandy and Gage's brother and Gage's sister struggle, knowing there's nothing we as fathers and stepfathers can really do except for be there for them. We can't heal them. We can't take the grief away. We just have to be there and try to make all the positive difference in their lives. Any father or stepfather that's lost can know what I feel. And they need to let themselves be open and vulnerable to their families, because it only aids in the healing process. Because we're all in it together. We're not four individuals going through this. We're a family.
I don't think a lot of people, I know Gage didn't, and I'm sure a lot of other people who are using drugs don't think about the effects of what they leave on their families. Gage has a little brother and a little sister and an older sister, and God, they miss him so much. And then, you turn your mom into this person who makes videos and tries to spread awareness about drugs for you. Like, it's just, this isn't what I pictured my life to be.
If there was anything I could say is, I want Gage's life to matter. The shirt I'm wearing right now, there's one thing in common with all these people, except for one exception. On the back of this shirt is the age. They were all under 30 years old. It's wiping out a whole generation. Kids are going to jail over this, and when they get out of jail, they don't know anything but this life. So I feel that my purpose is to start working with these children or young adults, giving them skills. I've been in the trades for 25 years. Give them something to look forward to. Because if they have no hope, they have no option. That's what they're going to do. Kids these days that are using fentanyl and other drugs, a lot of times they aren't given a second chance at life like I was. I was able to get clean, and I had a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance, however many it took. These young people these days are taking drugs one time and dying. They don't have a second chance.
It's been almost 2 years that he's been gone, and I don't feel well in life. Like, I don't feel good unless I'm doing some kind of purpose, and I'm remembering his name, and I'm making sure the world doesn't forget about him, and at the same time that his death wasn't in vain, and that maybe it saves one more person.